Welcome, one and all. You've successfully uploaded your consciousness to the cloud and have found yourself synced again with your favorite podcast. Welcome, one and all, to The Garage. I'm your host, Dan Massimino. I'm the organizer of this little shindig here in the virtual studio. Just want to take a quick minute to thank our many listeners out there in podcast land. In these stressful times, your support means everything to us, and we love all the notes and the feedback that we get from you guys, so keep it coming, please. Friends, thank you for tuning in and letting us fill your ears for a bit while we try to make the retail media industry a better place for us all. If you do happen to be joining us for the first time, welcome in. Grab your tool belt and slide up to the workbench and let me fill you in on what it is we say we do here. The Garage is a place where we get together and talk about many things, but where we really hit that sweet spot is when we gather our friends and we dive into the why, the how, and the who cares of retail media innovation. Now, speaking of uploading your consciousness to the cloud, my co-host's computer-like intelligence has been likened to a mixture of Deep Blue, the chess computer for those who don't know, Mr. Data from Star Trek, the Whopper from War Games, all swirled together in a blender and dusted with a light coating of the maniacal nature of the HAL 9000. A man who lives in his own virtual reality, the VP of Product Innovation at Albertsons Media Collective, Evan Havorka. Beep, boop, beep, my friend. How are you?
Beep, boop, beep, back. I think you're attempting to make me blush, which doesn't translate well in a podcast, Dan, but I always do blush with your overly generous introductions. I appreciate that. And equally blessed to have you on the podcast with your deep retail knowledge, especially when it comes to divisions, in-stores, how merchants play, in particular for this episode where we're going to get deep on in-store. Super excited.
It's a fun day today, Evan, and thank you. Yeah, don't blush because that would totally blow my whole AI robot analogy that I just did. So let's not go there. We've got two guests to share our space today. So let's go ahead and hop in and get started with them. So, dear listener, as Evan said, we're exploring the transformative power of in-store retail media and how these innovations are driving brands and retailers to rethink a little bit how they connect with consumers in a physical space. Think of everything from leveraging location intelligence to enhancing the in-store experience through audio and visual media. Today, we're going to dive into how these advancements are shaping the future of retail. And we've leveraged two experts and these two rock stars. Our first guest, the Vice President of Advertising and Media Partnerships with Placer.ai, Dan Hight. Dan is a strategic partner leader with expertise in mobile, local search, and performance advertising programs. His thought leadership provides strategic direction for maximizing revenue opportunities through partnerships and leads Placer.ai's efforts working with agencies, media companies, and platforms to leverage location analytics and market intelligence for any physical location in a privacy-safe way. A graduate of the University of North Texas, go Mean Green, please welcome Dan Hight. By the way, before you say anything, left to right on my screen, I can see Vader, Luke, Chewbacca. I can see Mando. I can see the X-Wing. Below that would be the Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor. My man, my brother from another mother, Dan Hight. How are you?
I'm great, Dan. How are you?
Even better now that you're here because I share the nerd energy with you. I'm excited to have you here. The name Dan Squared. We're going to kick this thing into high gear.
Dan Squared, in homage to War Games from Whopper. Shall we play a game?
Shall we play a game?
Dan, I think you're blushing looking at Dan Hight's background.
Yes, I am. Are those crystal? Are they glass? The Hulk looks shiny.
They are crystal, Swarovski crystal.
So good. So, dear listener, if you're on podcast, we do have video option. I would highly suggest you turn that on. Our second guest is the Senior Vice President of Global Retail Media and Partnerships at Vibenomics, a mood media company, Paul Brenner. With 30 years of experience in media and advertising, Paul specializes in in-store advertising, focusing on digital in-store audio and display. He is dedicated to using these channels for impactful campaigns that drive results on a global scale, because why be small? Also, an IAB committee member and collaborates on innovative solutions for retail media networks, aiming to enhance the advertising ecosystem. He's a family man with a passion for youth education and aiding underprivileged kids. I knew I'd like you as well. I'm a former fifth grade teacher, so we can vibe on that. Not all heroes wear capes, folks, not the ones in Dan Hight's background, but Paul Brenner. Please welcome him to our podcast. Paul, how are you?
No robot analogy for me, Dan?
I mean, Well, if you look at your background versus Dan's background, for those who can't see, it's a beige wall with an empty whiteboard. It doesn't get more robotic than that, my friend.
I should have added something, but yours left to right. I can't relate to the cowboy hat in the background.
Oh, wow. It's not store-bought. That's the real deal. If you can't tell I'm in Idaho, my background will give that away pretty quick. Let's dive in then real quick. We're talking in-store. We're talking all things physical space. So Paul, explain to us how Vibenomics came to be and how it's changing the in-store shopping experience, if you would.
I'll do my best, but we're along for the ride in a lot of ways. I mean, I think we started back in 6-7 years ago when the commoditization of in-store music messaging screens was kind of at its bottom. But then you have this retail media thing exploding. In-store not really talked about yet. And you think about that, Evan, back when we were arguing where we should live in the donut, and in-store wasn't there yet. And we just continued to build software. The team that built our software did some things you might know of, a little thing called Exact Target, which became Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So a very enterprise-driven company. And we just moved along. We kept building great software and listening to the market. And all of a sudden, one day, people like Evan and other retailers said, in store, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think we might do that. So we really just worked alongside. I work with about 8 different retail media networks to help them embrace digital in-store, audio, screens, platform development. So I get a nice purview.
To be fair, kind of a lot happens in store. So for us to just come along for the ride seems a little behind the times, but I'm glad you guys are here to help us solve for that a little bit. And Dan, about a year ago, Vibenomics and Placer.ai announced their partnership. How are you guys supporting Vibenomics? What's that look like? What is that partnership?
Yeah. So at Placer, it historically was focused on the commercial real estate industry. So really, what is the ideal tenant for a shopping center? Obviously, when you think about commercial real estate, getting the right tenant in a long-term lease is critically important. Then retailers started working with us really in terms of where they want to build their next location, or if they're acquiring a company, what's the value of acquiring a company? Then we started expanding into CPG, what types of products we start putting inside those stores. And then starting in probably 2023 time period, 2022, started getting some interest from the advertising ecosystem, namely because we knew where privacy was going. The days of one-to-one ad targeting was quickly evolving and moving more to a cohort-based solution. So we started our partnership with Vibe a little over a year ago. And at the end of the day, we provide visit count to the retail locations that's going there, the amount of time that people are in there by hour, by day, and the audience of the types of people that are going to those stores, again, in a privacy safe way. So we're a key component to understanding the total audience and the total reach of who is addressable inside of a store at kind of any point in time. So that's how we're working with Vibe, and we're very happy to work with them. We work with a number of retail media networks. Paul mentioned, in-store is becoming, flavor of the day, where people want to captivate on these billions or trillions of dollars of assets that are out in the physical world. And e-commerce has been the fast growing part of retail media. Now the in-store component, because so much more transaction volume and so much more visitation is taking place in the physical world. It's really about how do I really digitize these physical stores to bring kind of that online experience into a physical world in a way that doesn't really interrupt the shopping experience. So we play some roles in that ecosystem.
So you can tell pretty quickly, listeners, why we're so excited to have this dynamic duo join us. If you were to write a textbook on what I should go study to prepare for the retail media in-store revolution, it would be those two storylines: retail foot traffic, ID list targeting, general location-based awareness and dwell times, and then enterprise scale, doing it in a world where it's one thing to change Safeway.com and put some advertising and some search components on there. It's a very different thing to change the 2,200 stores that physically represent the banners at Albertsons. And that requires heavy lifting, a level of commitment and background that a lot of our digital-only ad tech companies don't bring to the conversation. So this problem, we'll get into it today, can only be solved by acknowledging some of those very challenging real-world, physically real-world insights and opportunities. And so super excited to have you both join us. Throw it over to you, Dan, for a first round of questions. I got a lot already, but I'll wait for you to start us off.
Fine. We'll go straight for the jugular here. what does a unified in-store strategy then look like? With all those things you brought up of opportunity but challenge, what does a unified in-store strategy look like, you two?
It's such a simple but complicated answer, Dan. It's like everybody I think that I work with knows what it like. We want to digitize, we want to standardize, we want to use one platform in the same way like their digital commerce solution. They're very much in control of that world. And they get to decide how they want it to work, how they want to measure things against it, how they want to manage approvals of content and all of those things that are just been naturally. Evan sits in a room with a bunch of people and decides that. You look over the wall at people on the other side, merchants operating the brick and mortars. Unified could mean how to bring those two sides together and think more holistically together, right? That could be one way of thinking about unified, which is organizationally a big challenge. Or you can think of just about as technology unification, standardized hardware, standardized impression measurement, standardized foot traffic, standardized viewability, all the things that would make it feel like a digital ecosystem. So unified has two meanings, I mean, in my mind, and that's what I deal with a lot. I was just at another large enterprise yesterday and managing the expectations of a brand equity driven merchant with the monetization approach of a retail media network team is, people want to solve problems, but it's also a lot of legacy thinking, and that's hard to overcome.
Yeah, that's great. I'll give Dan a minute to think about how he's going to improve on your answer and just add a couple comments. The journey for in-store is not the same as what we've seen for digital when it comes to media in general. We'll talk retail media, but this is true of any media company. That singular focus of pushing ads, that is going to be so detrimental to the customer experience. The whole business of retail is to maintain a positive, growing relationship with their shoppers. And that means repeat visits. That means feeling good when they're in that shopping experience. Now, there's a tremendous amount of research and coupon clipping and list building and recipe inspiration happening digitally, but the vast majority of the physical transactions happening in store. And so we are hyper aware and hypersensitive to maintaining and growing that customer experience. How do you do that? Well, we have to think about in-store not as a media channel, not as a publisher, but leverage some of the things you hit on, Paul, all the other assets that a retailer has to combine with that, including things like all the work the merchants do. What's in stock, what's end cap, what's on sale, what's regionally specific for that weather, for that demographic that lives next to that store. Those are some really powerful things that take us from a publisher to a really dynamic media solution for big brands, in our case, CPGs. And so I love that concept, but irrelevant that I love it, it's mandatory to think like that when trying to establish an in-store solution in a major retailer.
Let me touch on two things. One is going back to what Paul was talking about. I think part of it is also understanding the common measurement, but how do you measure incrementality? Because obviously advertising and shopper marketing, trade marketing has been around since the dawn of time. And I want to ultimately increase people's basket sizes ultimately. So how do I measure that? Both from an online perspective and from a physical world perspective. So that kind of that omni-channel solution. So I think solutions require kind of unified measurement solutions. And the other, Evan, you mentioned this, and I think it's very important to think about relative to any type of retail media strategy, is it needs to be something that enhances the consumer experience. We do not need, I'm old enough to remember, and I know Paul is as well. We all remember the 90s pop-up ads. We don't need pop-ups interrupting our consumer experience. So how does it enhance the consumer experience? And kind of, since Dan's talking about my action figures behind me, we'll talk about Spider-Man. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, or with great power comes great responsibility. So you really have to balance those opportunities to engage with consumers, but not interrupt and disrupt that natural path to purchase, whether it's in a digital format or in a physical format or in a phygital format, if you will.
Phygital. Okay. I'm going to have to Google that later. Don't want to hear it by clicking. That's a great answer, Dan. That definition could lead some teams or companies to play conservatively. Let's not disrupt. Let's not take away. Let's move with caution. I think that is one safe way to move forward. We're approaching it, and how I think we should encourage other big US retailers to approach it is this is an opportunity to do all those things you said, but also have really unique inspirational moments. We all know that the future retail store cannot be a NASCAR side picture of 15 logos. But what it could be is a really dynamic, temperature appropriate, time of year appropriate, demographic, location appropriate, inspirational piece of creative, like a recipe that's talking about those avocados that now maybe have, again, merchant support where the tomatoes, the garlic, the avocado mix are all sitting, common box. And the recipe is showing, you've all been on the TikTok and Pinterest recipe apps. They snap the fingers and all this beautiful stuff comes to life. That is a major driver of solving someone's problem. Like, here's a solution. Avocados, they kind of sell themselves to a degree, but when you show someone how they can quickly turn it into something more special, show them the path forward to solving bigger problems, could be the backyard barbecue, the birthday party, the Friday night date night, put that together with a merchandise strategy, and then the media, and now you're getting into a co-brand experience. You're not talking about here's a new brand at a price point. You're talking about enrich your date night, or did you forget it was date night? You better pick up some things and look like a hero when you get home. Now you're turning this experience not from a, hey, let's just play small ball and not disrupt. We're moving into, we're actually bringing much more of a solution-based enrichment to the shopping experience. And we're supporting CPG ad dollars in the meantime.
Other than like when you walk in your store and you see a sign, whether that's a static sign or a dynamic sign, that's that list checking moment. Everybody kind of knows some people clutter the front of the store with list checking and kind of initial stuff. What I feel like people are stuck at right now, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about what you're presenting here, Evan, but if it's just a screen and the placement of that screen, and then content that comes with some idea about this is a category specific or this is relatable, I think that's very version 1. I mean, I think it's very version 1. If you can think about how to use the dynamic nature of digital to enhance, and I'll give you a funny example. So let's say that you have screens in the deli and you have certain screens around the store, and somehow you've connected an oven event in the deli or in the cooking area, that the cooking event automatically tells some server somewhere that something's ready and it's relatable to that thing. The roaster chickens are done, the croissants are baked, the whatever, and create some kind of automated, look, they're ready. And you better buy stovetop stuffing, and you're going to need Ziploc bags for after, you got to put your leftovers away. It's almost like, how do you go from just, here's a screen in a zone, by a category, let's make it relatable. But how do you actually make it dynamic for the shopping experience? I think that's version 2. And I think that can be a lot more fun.
Honestly, how we used to do it, I'm an old merchant. We used to do it through smell. That's the only thing I can liken to your analogy there, is walking around with the loaves of bread that were freshly baked, and all of a sudden we're inspiring that incremental purchase. Now let's have pasta sauce. Now let's have the noodles that go with it, and Yahtzee co-brand program.
And you got a probe in a chicken that says, I'm done. Boom. And then it goes on the screen and says, here's your dinner tonight. Automated a little bit.
Much more dynamic than the classic IO, except what the marketer is trying to push. And it's connecting it to what we offer. And then somewhere in the middle lives the perfect nirvana state. But that is a brilliant idea. And we're going to patent that. Thank you, Paul. Everything mentioned on here.
Just the end cap. Should we replace shelf space with end cap display screens? I mean, that's kind of what we're all debating right now, is placement and then content. But is that really in alignment with the unified? Back to your Massa Diesel quote, what is the thing that unifies? I think you have to get the merchants excited about how digital can help them, then talk about monetization. I think if you come in hard with monetization, you're never going to find that unified conversation.
Bravo.
Writing, Dan and I are taking notes. Thank you. We'll take that back.
Yeah. I come from an old coaching tree with a father that's an old merchant, and I would routinely have to present ideas back to him from a shopper marketing perspective. And the question was always, does it change your shopping behavior? I feel like some of these capabilities you're talking about, ultimately version 1, yes. Version 2, for sure, yes. So when you engage in those conversations with retail media networks that may or may not have great partnerships on the merchandise side, what are those talking points? What are those things that you can say that will inspire a merchant to think differently?
Man, it's about trust. It's about just acknowledging that what they are responsible for every day. I mean, I'll give you an example. So if I'm working with a retail media network for audio or screens, I'm always about examples that we can share with the merchant to get them excited. So for like, if I'm doing a screen project, I'll take every floor format that retail, it doesn't have to be grocery. I think it could be sporting goods or whatever that we're talking to, and create these fly-throughs where it's like, here's the placement, here's branded content, and here's a few talking points about how it's going to help you. And really just kind of putting that in front of them and use that as dialogue first to get them excited about it. Because at the end of the day, they just want to know they have some level of control over the content. They want to know if it's going to work all the time, or if it breaks, who's going to fix it, and all those kind of things. I think we led with that in the early days. And I think it's become more secondary. It's been more like getting the merchant excited about the brand equity, the loyalty program promotion, the creative ideas they could come up with that make kind of the old school static signs that a lot of people know don't actually work, can kind of declutter and use those new things to drive. And that's just the way we've been having success. And I don't know where you are, Evan, on it, but I know it's not easy.
It's definitely not easy. And one of the challenges is the identity piece. It changes, like we'll talk about the not easy part for the traditional retail media skills, and love Dan Hight's POV on this one. We generally show our value to investors, including site and app investors and partners, because we can really hyper focus on who we want to target, message that is next best for them, generally not in an in-store experience, right? More in a focused single track experience, let's say on a social platform. Show them that appropriate gluten-free ad, and then track the results from that. And it's a little more siloed and singular. We stitch it together in an omni-channel strategy, which feels good, but it's all very digital and much in that mindset of I'm here to solve a single problem, not complete a whole shopping trip. What powers that is identity, right? And the retailers and retail media networks of note stand behind their number one asset, which is their loyalty program, their CRM data set. And that ID then becomes the critical decision point on what to show and how to prove incremental value, because we can close the loop. Not only that, we can show the incrementality off that sale. That changes dramatically when we get to in-store. We don't have, and I don't think we should have, this nearly the same level of identity when you're in the physical retail store for many reasons. But fortunately, to start with, there's not a lot of great ways to identify individuals throughout the shopping experience. Point of sale is a different story, but that's at the end. That doesn't count. Some in-app experience kind of starts to paint a picture of who might be doing things. But ultimately, we need solutions that can talk at a much broader level where we're not dependent on audiences and IDs, because that's just not the nature of how in-store is going to work. That breaks some of our value proposition. It certainly breaks our closed loop attribution model in its current sense. Fortunately, we've got companies like Placer who've been doing things like this for decades. I'd love to hear your perspective, one, selfishly on how we can solve that problem, but more importantly, how the industry should start thinking about audience-less types of approaches, because it goes beyond in-store, but it's becoming a bigger thing for other channels given cookie sensitivities.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of those things, there's a different experience online and things are a different experience that consumers expect online, because we've been trained for so many years, for better or for worse, to give up some of that privacy. And you understand what that trade-off is more directly. When you get into the in-store, the physical world, you get to that creep factor of even if you can, do you want to? Either from a regulatory perspective or certainly from just a consumer backlash perspective. So I think that there's this watchful eye of get not too specific, but how do you get specific enough to start understanding that? So that's where understanding a cohort, who is going inside of any particular location at any point in time on any day a week, starts to get really interesting when you start looking at not all Albertsons stores or Safeway stores or Town Thor stores or whatever flagship we're talking about, or as Paul mentioned, sporting goods stores or home and improvement store. All those environments are not the same at any point in time. Every store is unique. Every audience is unique. What you sample on a Tuesday at 3:00 is different than what you sample at 9:00 in the morning on a Saturday, based on the types of people who are going there. So if you have, and that's one of the things that we bring, I will work with Vibe on this today, is we're bringing the audience composition of who are the people who go to that store on a store-by-store basis in a privacy-safe way. So we know the types of people that are going there and can dimensionalize that, whether it's from a demographic perspective or a psychographic perspective, the types of people that can inform the types of ads that might resonate, or the types of products, or the type of trigger points, like Paul was going back to, of what is likely to work in there. And then obviously from a transaction perspective, you're going to look at the totality of that and see, did we get incremental lift based on reaching these groups of people? Again, it's not going to be the one-to-one targeting, but out of home more broadly. And obviously in-store placates a little bit more to the out of home world than it does to kind of the traditional digital world. And that's where the IED standards of in-store audio and display measurement drew on some of the parallels historically that were in the out of home experience. So it's reaching a group of people. And then how do you measure, the totality of the incremental sales that are there on the throughput? So you'll see it on the back end, but in terms of front end, it's more of reaching groups of people.
One of the things I think Evan and Dan talk more about this, we produced the white paper about impressions, and we've said many times together on stage or whatever, like it wasn't a mandate. We weren't saying this is the way. It was like somebody's got to be more specific than what the IAB published. The IAB just kind of put a laundry list of kind of membership input, if you will, and said, okay, go try things. And I think if you're going to not lose your value proposition, you want to take what you've done with onsite, offsite, and make the in-store piece additive and incremental. You're never going to get one-to-one, and you're probably never going to get to a place where content is dynamic enough for it to be even considered one-to-one. Like, even if it was one-to-few is where you were trying to get to. I think we have to get to an impression standard. And I say that because if you look at the zone approach for any type of retailer, impression consistency and believability by the brand so that it factors into the overall method that you use for that measurement, knowing you're not going to get to one-to-one in that store. So what are you steadfast on, Evan? Like, to me, it feels like impressions. And then is that Placer data based off some weighted average of buying behaviors? I think biometric is going to make this camera thing a slow walk, but it's becoming more and more challenging to find acceptance on a nationwide basis. So that itself is going to make it problematic. Not to say it can't, but more problematic. So I'm interested in what you think, Evan. I mean, Dan and I think that if you're going to make a media functional for a 1 million audience, it's about impressions. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I'm going to steal some of Dan Massimino's past content. We do need a common KPI, no doubt about that. I think retail media has been given a lot of grace by not having standardizations across just about everything we do. The SQL is not unique. It's the people in the database that are unique, but we all have to treat our product as the most special. Clean rooms are a great example of where standardization is going to create chaos for CPGs who need to partner with 5, 10, 15 RMNs. So the commonality of a KPI, absolutely.
I mean, we've kind of touched on it here. We haven't said the big M word. We've been touching around it a little bit, but measurement and trusting that in-store channel and metrics. How do we ease the worries to advertisers, to merchants, to frankly, anybody engaging with this, agencies, to prove out these impressions and prove out the metrics that could potentially be challenging from an in-store perspective?
Well, maybe I'll start on that, Paul, and then you can dive in. So I think, first of all, I think what's going to have to happen in the industry is going to have a currency that everyone believes in. I think we're a little bit away from that, but eventually we're going to need to have that. And this is where we're working with so many of the retailers and CPGs already. So the fact that people are trusting the Placer underlying data, they can't reach more people inside of a Tom Thumb or Safeway at 250 on a Wednesday afternoon that are physically there. That's the upper bound of what is addressable. Like, at the end of the day, you can't reach more than the 200 people that might be in a store at any given point in time. And then as Paul mentioned, kind of the zone aspect of what are those auxiliary sensors that start to break down the store into more and more parts. So understanding the total addressable audience, get some sort of on-site component that's added into that is kind of table stakes, at least in terms of getting people to in the door. And then from a measurement perspective, and I mean, you kind of already mentioned this, at the end of the day, it's like, I don't care if I believe in the impressions, am I selling more product? And it's not just, am I selling the same amount of product? And Dan, you kind of mentioned this as well. I mean, if it's selling and people just happen to go in the store more often, it's really more about incrementality. So I think people are going to want trust the impressions that they're getting, then ultimately getting validation of selling the product, and then ultimately getting to incrementality. That's where this is all going. But we're in the first inning, I would say, and we want to get a common trust factor first and foremost. And then From there, I think it's going to be stair steps into selling more throughput and then ultimately getting to incremental.
Do you think as agencies coming more on board with in-store advertising and working with retail media networks, how do we incorporate this? Do you think it's those three things that are going to allow them to really unlock their thinking in including this in an omni-channel program? That's for all three of you, actually. How do we get agencies to engage? Is it that? Is it the believability, the reliability, or is it something else?
I can just give you examples that we have been trying to work through. And we have done basic control test in-store analysis for years. And they almost become stock. The trend shows the average is kind of the same number. A lot of people tout that. In the last year and a half, though, we have really moved into taking the impression-based model, that Dan and I have worked together on, and layering that into the omni-channel pie. So managing in-store, whether that's audio or screen only type of plays or PLAs or sponsored ads. Now we're doing some stuff with offsite. We just kind of assume the impression is okay with everybody at this point. And then we go into, okay, what are your real interests? And I don't think there's a silver bullet there, Dan, because I think every brand and type is different. But I mean, I've seen very positive responses to spending per trip, spending per household, basis points on share of category. And it depends on the cost of the item. Is it $1? Is it $1,000? It's all kind of relative there as well. So my answer would be, to get the brands most interested, is to offer them enough information to where they can see the effectiveness. I go back to what Evan said. Did it move product? Like units per day, right? Did it go up? And I think that's what we're kind of hung up on is everybody kind of singing from the same hymn book here. And I just don't feel that way as I look across the 9 different retail media companies I'm working with every day.
So just work with one, alphabetical order, start with A.
That's a great call out and a nod to standardization again. I wanted to hit on a few things though, just for point of clarification, at least for this group and maybe for the industry. But when we typically talk omni-channel, off-platform display, the social platforms, on-site display, on-site search, there's a whole collection of traditional digital products that we can balance a budget across to maximize performance by objective. And now we're introducing in-store, but in-store itself, you hit on it, Paul, it's far from single channel. And even the screen definition can often get chopped up into 2 or 3 vendors, depending on how things manifest. Fuel screens, for example, often run through a separate channel. In-store audio, in-store signage, shelf talkers, blades. There's lots of different historical contracts and agreements across large retailers that they're immutable, or at least within the next 6 to 12 month horizon. You can't swap out some of these large installations to get to a single vendor, single stack. So we should acknowledge those as multi-channel tactics, if not multi-channel, period. And then how important is it within that in-store? I think it's important to talk multi-channel holistically. If you're going to put some on-site search and mix in some in-store and put together a recipe on Pinterest, I think that's a beautiful set of optimization opportunity within omnichannel that's outside of my skill set to go deeper on. But if you're talking in-store only, just on those tactics I listed, how important is it to have a common ad server technology, given we're not going to have pure traditional audiences, one-to-one audiences, per Dan's previous comment? Is it critical to have all those feeding up to a common decision engine, frequency tracker? These are going to be different ad creatives, not just size and shape, but one will be audio, one will be a physical printed sticker, 10 will be digital videos of different lengths and sizes. How important is it to have that common ad server be the governing body across all that?
We're finding is very important. I mean, I think if I told you that Albertsons can only pick 5 in-store technologies to deliver what you want, you'd laugh at me. I mean, it would be like, no, it's probably 15. And so I think a quick answer is the more you can centralize that inventory and the creative and the distribution, the timing, the frequency, the more consistency you're going to have to measure it against the effectiveness of other things in the multi-channel. But that's not reality. There's too much legacy. So you got to decide, are you starting with new and then you're over time replacing? That's just kind of the way it's going to have to be thought about. but I've worked on other in-store, at-store specific testing where it might be things in the parking lot plus some technologies in the store, either screen or audio. And it's oftentimes hard to even find one company that can measure all those things together. One company does this thing, one company does that thing. We have a solution, and you somehow smash this amalgamation of control tests results into one analysis. I just don't know how that's sustainable if it's not movement towards one central place for in-store to be managed. Doesn't mean you can't pick multiple providers. I mean, to be clarified, because one company's only going to make hand scanners. They're not going to make something else or a blood pressure machine or whatever it is. Like, those are very specific verticals, but it doesn't mean you don't want to connect it to something and manage the content.
But I don't see that dissimilar to what we had in the digital world. Just we had all these desperate ad serving platforms, and then that started getting unified. And then we moved to header bidding. So there's starting to become more commonality, knowing that nobody was going to replace their entire stack. And how do you get these legacy stacks to ultimately communicate with each other? And ones that can't communicate with each other eventually get degraded and replaced over time. But you have capital, obviously CapEx involved with some of that stuff with the screenage. But I don't see this dissimilar to where we were in traditional digital 15 years ago. And then that moved to much.
You mean trying to take on the number of screen formats that were always kind of exploding and having to deal with those?
I'm just talking just in terms of everyone's own proprietary ecosystem that they had. And then we moved to commonality of supply side platforms and started to unify how that all worked. And obviously on the DSP side as well, you started to see a lot of that fragmentation coming together. I see the in-store world and, Paul, to your point, kind of the parking lot world and all that physical world, visit journey ecosystem. We're away from it, but starting to think a similar way.
Gentlemen, listen, we're coming up on time, but I will tell you what, I am going to propose this live, and I'm not used to rejection, so I'm going to throw that out there here. What do you guys say about a part 2?
Love it.
It's your call.
No, it's your call, sir.
I'm in.
All right.
Only if you wear the Don Imus hat next time.
For you, I'll do it.
We'd love to have you back. Yeah, there's a ton of questions we didn't get to. And I think this is such an evolving space too. And it's not a one size fits all. I'll just throw one quick thing out there, Dan. That commoditization of external publishers, like in the open website space, was required because there was 100,000 websites. We needed commonality in the DSP, commonality in the IB ad units. That won't fly in the retail space because of the unique nature of each store and the experience they're trying to bring to market. But what's the happy medium? I think commonality on KPI, commonality on potential creative could be in there. It certainly won't all manifest through an open DSP connection that an agency can buy into, at least not in the next year or two, or maybe the remnant will. So then we still have to act like that's our goal as an industry. And I think act like Nirvana single ad tech stack across our internal tactics is our goal internally. Paul, to your point, I think that's our North Star, even though we have to evolve there through the many vendors we work with today. And maybe the Nirvana state is just 3 and then a bunch of homegrown in-house or custom white label products with smart folks like yourself. But collectively as an industry, and this will be our challenge maybe that we tease for the next episode, how does a group of retailers who traditionally don't work well together bring a product to life across internal teams that traditionally haven't had to build together, like merchants and the RMN team? We'll even throw CPGs and agencies to really ramp up the diversity of points of view to bring that to market in a way that says, hey, this is pretty consistent. Without some concerted effort in that journey, we're going to wind up with some very wild, unique solutions.
Yeah. Well, it'll hold back the whole industry. I mean, there's going to be some must-haves, and so that's going to be able to force people to bend to it. But at the end of the day, it's a large enough ecosystem that there has to be standardization so that it allows people to scale. Like at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So it's in unique environments, but scale is going to be the important thing for all of that.
I agree with you. And there's going to be give and take. Some of it can happen in a standards environment. Some of it may be a little more formal and maybe an RMN consortium of think tank. There are ways to go about that. And it's great to be talking about it with you guys today.
Well, long gone are the days of the giant poster boards and the oversized markers that I used to steal from my dad and sniff in the back room. But we're making progress with in-store marketing, and we're super excited that you guys could be part of the Garage podcast here. Yes, I know I made Jessica, who's our wonderful support from Albertsons Media Collective, sweat a little bit when I live proposed part 2. So we'll get that on the books, listeners, and make sure that we let you know when that is coming. So thank you, Paul Brenner, Dan Hight. Thank you so much for being here today on The Garage. We're very excited to have you, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you very much, guys.
I'm
Really appreciate it.
Evan, for the good of the order, for everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Garage. We'll be back with more episodes, including the part 2 with Dan and Paul. So if you like what you heard, and we know that you did, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. Go check us out with our partners at Adweek, and we'll be back for another episode of The Garage.